the people that we martyr. Like, they have this specific understanding, comprehension, and grasp of how our actions are impacting how we live as a society, how we treat one another, like the cause and effect, the reactions, and the decisions that we make because of those reactions, and just experiences that come with that. And then you look at these people who seem larger than life, who are just simply, bringing back to your point, like making people think on a different level, like thinking differently, but having that introspective conversation in bringing attention to that which everyone wants to see. Like, that's the better face of us. Like, that's us being on the good list.
Mm-hmm.
You look at Rosa Parks, who was like, I'm not moving out of my seat. I'm going to teach you a life lesson on, like, Rosa Parks is one of them, but like many people in the 50s and 60s were teaching us life lessons on, like, we bleed the same.
Yeah.
You have a specific reaction to the threat, right? Like, I don't want to call it an invisible threat, but it's a made up threat because of my skin color. But we bleed the same. There's no reason for you to, And I think that when I talk about us as America kind of going through this identity crisis, and this like not wanting to, a lot of people have been talking about us not wanting to reconcile or come to terms with our history. Like, we think of America still as this wild, wild west.
Yeah.
This like idea that we need to go bring our guns out a blazing and go, like, put a stake in our territory, without thinking of all the people that we brought to America to make that dream happen. The Chinese, the Louisiana Purchase, the bringing over folks who did not sign up to be slaves. No one in their right mind ever signs up to be a slave. No one in their right mind willingly goes to go and be whipped and chained and murdered if you're not picking their cotton. Like, I'm sorry. No one comes willingly to do that and be of servitude or to be considered 3/5 of a person. So the 3/5 compromise. Like, there's these people throughout time and history who are reminding us of that message. And I do take offense that we only think about it when Mariah Carey comes on talking about what the fuck she wants this year. Or the only thing that she wants this year. Like, how is that theme song all of a sudden the switch of, like, I'm going to go be a little extra generous with my respect, time, care, and money. Like, that's the time I'm going to... So, I don't know. There's, like, that feels very discongruent, I think, for a lot of folks. I mean, being grown up, being brought in that Roman Catholic culture, I feel like that's why there was such a separation.
Mm.
And I think that's, for the longest time now, Catholicism and those who are Catholic or Christian, or, that's their practice or their belief, just the hypocrisy. They've been battling this since the dawn of time, and that's all about control. Like, that's completely about control. It's the biggest control system that we have next to government. And I think that's why so many people in the LGBT community and other communities are just like, no, like, your religion makes no sense. Like, you have no legs to stand on because you don't apply any of your teachings to real life. You reserve forgiveness for people who go to church on Sunday. God is not in the church. God was never in the church. He was never in a church. That bitch was walking around talking to everybody, being of service to people. He was never in the church to begin with. And the bitch sure as fuck wasn't white.
Ooh.
And I think that we still get very caught up. Like, we just are now seeing there's a gentleman who is recreating all those, like, early biology pictures with black babies and, like, black bodies.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Right?
The gestation with, like, yeah. It's like, wow, like, where did I saw that, I think something similar earlier today. Oh, picture frames. So, like, the
having black families in picture frames?
Mm-hmm. Like, as the...
yeah, that feels new, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was at Target earlier today, and I was walking through and just kind of, like, bebopping through, and it just kind of like stood out to. It was like the way it was positioned and like marketed, and I love to see it. It's just interesting that it stood out like it did, and I was like, it just made me think like what you're saying of like those that I don't know if he's a doctor or an artist or something, but I did see the article of someone that is now like making these diagrams because I was like, wow, you don't even realize it's not happening, um, and that can yeah. Anyway,
I have more to say about this.
yeah, go ahead.
I got three things to say about this.
Yeah.
One is having black people in the picture frame, having a commercial with just black people.
Mm-hmm.
They are not the secondary. They're not like the B-list actor. They are the commercial, right? Like the black person is the person who owns the business. The black person is the person behind the counter. The black person is the customer. Like there aren't any white people in that commercial. That for me was, I thought, like, finally we have something that's just all black advertising. And then you think about the things that black people have just had to have all black themselves anyway. You look at BET,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think about it when I go to Nicole's house. We were watching. I can't remember what the fuck we were watching last night. It wasn't last night. It was whatever night I was there. I can't remember if the name of the show was Brooklyn or if the name of the show was Harlem or whatever the name of the show is. But it was basically like a black version of Sex in the City.
Mm.
And I thought about this. I'm like, every time I go to Nicole's house, I'm watching. I'm not gonna call it like the black version of whatever it is, but I'm watching like Black Beverly Hills, like the Wives of Beverly Hills. But I love it's NBA Wives. Fucking love that show.
Mm-hmm.
Inc. I think that they have like a thing in Chicago and like just like black people running a black business. It's their reality TV show. And I thought about like I only see that when I go to Nicole's house. I don't see that at other people's houses. Like they're not watching that.
Yeah.
Right? And I look at Avante, who's about to be one, who has a Filipino mom and a black dad, and thinking about like, okay, how is this little boy gonna see himself in the world? I'm his godfather. Like, how am I gonna help him see himself in the world? All of a sudden, it became very real for me that my godson is black, and I need to be prepared for that too. I don't know shit. I don't know how to comb his hair. I'm not praying that he's gonna be like. I obviously want Nicole and Dante to be there for forever, but like, what would happen as a godfather? Like, he's my godson. There's a responsibility in that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Like there's this like Dante and I have known each other now for I don't know 6, 7, 8 years, and like we're getting really close. Like that for me, I know that there's something in that. Like I never realized how much I consume in terms of like TV or movie or advertising, where like I didn't realize how often I never saw black people in commercials, or how different it does look when you see like nothing but black people in commercials,
Mm-hmm.
and like how has it taken us this long to get there? Black-owned banks, HBCUs, like, and then I talk about like, oh, well, maybe trans people need to find their own sports. I don't know, maybe they do. I don't know, right? This is devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying that that's the way to do it, but like, black people had to create their own entire world of America, right? Like they live in their own version of America than white people in America. And I don't like. There's another part of me that was thinking about that as the conversation came up about trans athletes. Like you look at football and you look at basketball, and they're all black athletes, owned majority by white owners. But there aren't a lot of sports where, I don't want to say like you look at superior genes, but the professional athletes are mainly black men.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think about that as we're having that conversation about like trans athletes, who has the upper leg, and is it based around your gender? Is it based around your sex? Like who has the advantage? You look at Serena Williams, no one's gonna touch her on the court. That woman is probably one of the best tennis players to ever have fucking lived, regardless of her gender. And people were scared to play her, but why? And she came from the ghetto. They came from Compton. Her dad had to fight to get her into the top tennis coaching things. And they weren't going to give him the time of day. And like his perseverance made that happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now granted, these women were fucking talented. They have the talent, but they also put in the fucking work. And they didn't have millions of dollars. They weren't part of a country club.
But they do now.
But they do now.
But they do now.
Yeah, but they do fucking now. But like what it took for them to get there, I think, I don't know. I'm not really sure where this train of thought is going.
No,
exactly.
I love it.
But there's just this reckoning with like the level. I think goes back to like the level of consciousness that different people have. And you look at, I even look at when we talk about government and leadership, and you look at the AOCs in the world, and you look at the Tammy Duckworths in the world. And you look at all these different people. You look at the first Native American senator. You look at the first openly gay senator. You look at the first, we've got Muslim senators. And like how these women have been brought together and they've been vilified on the other side of the aisle. But in the same breath, like for the rest of us, it's like finally there's someone, now 5 people out of the thousands of people who are in government. We've got these 5. And for us, that's a milestone. And at the same time, like how hard they're keeping their voice alive and not be silenced. And it's just, I'm not saying that there's complacency out in the U.S., but there's just this, like, obviously we all want Bernie to be president, and it doesn't seem like that's ever going to happen. But he hasn't shut up yet. Right? And it almost gives me hope, like, good, there's still people. Even though, like, how we said, like, we look at our leadership now, and we're like, I don't see us in this leadership. I picked the lesser of 2 evils. Because I sure as fuck wasn't going to get stuck with that other shithead for another 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying, this one is my top pick, but I'm not, again, the lesser of 2 evils. Like, we don't see ourselves necessarily represented, and I think America is going through a crisis. There's, like, those who've been brought up to believe these last 300 years that they are God's gift to America and that America is their land, and it's still the wild, wild fucking West. It's not the Wild West. You asked for a fucking society. That's why you created the Constitution and created the United States. You created this whole justice system. You wanted society, not the Wild West. And that means you have to live with everyone that you fucking brought into this society. The Chinese people who fucking built the railroads, the Mexicans that you adopted along the way when you bought Louisiana, and the rest of fucking what used to be Mexico, that is now California and Texas. And I'm sorry, Mexicans were already here. Bitch, you just expanded your borders. Don't act like they weren't already fucking here. They were already here. And then you brought all the black people too. And then you said, hey, we're America, we're the melting pot, come over here and we'll sign you into Ellis Island. Nah, bitch, you invited everyone the fuck here, and now you don't get to pretend like they're not here. You don't get to pretend America is literally like one Catholic, religious, white man, conservative race. Like, I'm sorry, no. And I think that's where so many people are so fucking over it.
Yeah.
Where are they? I don't know. We marched a couple times.
We are right here. We are in conversation.
We are right here. And we're having these conversations, you're right. We're starting to have these conversations. We've been having these conversations,
we're not ready to put our voices out there because we can and because we want to.
Yes.
For me, I agreed to all of that. It's the why again that continued. Like yes, but why? Yes, but why? Like why? What? Like how did it become like this superior race complex? Like, I even think to that interaction that I had last night. And I was like, you are just another with an irrelevant opinion. It's, I no longer want to say it is what it is, because it is what it was at this point. Mm-hmm. But it comes down to, like, who really holds the reins? Who really is driving the, steering the ship, and who's really, and the why, like why has it been like this for so long, and why is it so difficult? Well, I guess I kind of get why it's so difficult for people to wrap their heads around people of color, you know, being treated as humans, and I think as no less than from anyone else. But it really frustrates me, you know, when I see privilege on any level, regardless of the skin, but the predominant privilege that continues to just like kind of get away with and flaunt and just kind of like, but I'm like, why? There's nothing about you that is superior. The way you think is irrelevant. The way that you perform is in across industry, across sport, whatever it is. There's nothing about this idea of a superior race that has any factual merit. Um, and then I just always go back to like why, like how did it shift to this, and why did it happen? And that's not a question I don't think anyone can really answer, but it is what it was. And within my lifetime, I feel like I want to continue to like raise that question. It's like, why do you think you have any merit in projecting your point of view onto me? Why do you feel that you have the right to question me? Because I can literally run circles around you, but yet you're making more than me, and you're you're viewed as this superior thing. And I keep thinking back to that interaction, like literally last night, and I'm like, dude, you're irrelevant. Like, I don't even remember what you're saying because it was so irrelevant. But I knew you were trying to attack me in my like subconscious, like is there to defend me when I need it. And I feel like that's what I've learned like a lot this past year is, I've always like said sorry or like apologize if I come off as I always have to defend my integrity for standing up for myself. And I find that so frustrating at this point. And it wasn't until the last 2 years of really diving into the history and my own, like uncovering my own history and like doing the 23andMe and just seeing what my genetic makeup is, to really like be like, oh, that makes sense of like who I am and what, the people before me that make up who I am. Um, and I find it a very fascinating and hopeful time. I feel like there's more tools out there now for people to like really dive into who they are, like as a person and their own biology, and then being able to make choices that aren't necessarily gonna like harm other people. But there's gonna be these other people that really want to hold on to their assumed power or just their assumed like superiority.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you have no relevance. You never really have, but because of societal norms, you've been made to feel like you're superior, and you're not. Like no one is. Like I don't believe any one race is. Like we are the human race. And that's what I, learned the most at working as an embalmer, an apprentice embalmer all those years, was that there really is only a thin layer that separates us. And when you see the anatomy of a human being, we're very similar to other animals that have similar circulatory systems and similar ribs and lungs and brains and other things. And that's why I'm able to like look through people, I think at times, or like see different people and really just see them as a person. Um, because I've seen the human form And in some ways it was traumatizing, but in other ways it wasn't. It was a very enlightening sort of experience to be like, oh yeah, in my early 20s, I was an apprentice embalmer, and I got to see the death experience celebrated multiple times a day through different religions. Um, and it's something I don't always like talk about just because the way it ended was so exhausting for me. Um, but it really, like, I really can't describe how those 5 years in that environment like really plays into how I view the world and how I
Well,
see people.
did you see anything particularly in your 5 years? And you said that you watched different people celebrate death or celebrate the life of someone. Was there anything in particular in those 5 years where you were just like, does any moment in time stand out where you were like, yes, for me this captures death, or yes, for me this captures the celebration of this person's life, or yes, I really loved how this particular event went, or conversely, was there any time where you were like, wow, this doesn't feel like a celebration of life or death. This is maybe the uglier side, or the mourning, or like, how different people mourn in different ways. I know that you look at that time of your life and there's like, obviously there's emotional attachment to that time of your life.
Mm.
But when you look at it and you say like you've seen these different pieces, I guess that is my question. Like, in the 5 years, did you see anything? Does any moment stand out where you're like, this for me is where this comes together?
Music,
In the
sound,
music that these folks chose.
sound. So there was a very specific moment where where I realized like every religion that came in, like, because it was a multi-denomination, it wasn't one specific religion that was represented. It was Sikhs, it was Catholic, it was Black Baptist, White Baptist, Mormon, um, all the religions, in Livermore, California. And not everyone had music, but usually there was always in Buddhist and Hinduism. So each had a tradition to how they celebrated based off their culture. And one of the things that I really respected about the Hindus was that they believed in cremation, um, and the procession that they would have and the prayers and the chanting, and even Buddhists. Each of them had a really kind of vibrant community within the community of Livermore, and then you had just American Christian, just Christian. We want some sort of religious. We want the cross up there, but we don't really belong to a specific thing. But mom or dad or whoever liked this song, and then their music. And then even when my family members died, and my aunt died, and my dad died, there was a soundtrack to their lives, and depending on the song and the lyrics, it evoked an emotion. And um, I always loved a good Black Baptist service because the the like visceral, sometimes pageantry of honoring their dead was the most lively. Like and that's what I think funerals are for. The funerals are for the living, is like people to come together and say what they got to say or not say. Um, but it was like literally we'd have different sequences of events, but it was music and sound that was consistent across all the religions. That they all had either an actual song or a soundtrack, or they actually hummed or hymned or sang or did a gong and a prayer and a chant with incense. And there was just something very very spiritual and energetic that I saw like every day. um, but then you have, my very first funeral that I ever did was with this young girl that passed away unexpectedly. You know, and to sit in that room with her parents, and I still like envision her mom like in the chapel with her by herself. Um, and it was, I saw it all. I saw soldiers come back from Iraq. Um, I saw very tragic things. I saw very beautiful moments of people like releasing and saying they're no longer in pain. Um, it was a whole experience, and to do that in my early 20s, um, it really woke me up. It really like imprinted. So I think it really, that's what inspires me most about music and sound, is like there's something very human about how humans create sound and music, and even just talking and speaking. And then what I've learned out here in DC, which I hadn't really gotten exposed to, is like people that can't hear, like deaf and hard of hearing people. I've never had such a visceral experience amongst the deaf community, because their energy and their frequency is on a whole different. It's like it's so human. I just feel like their energy and their presence in a really good way, but they can't hear. Yeah.
Is it interesting that it's just that's the only university that I know of dedicated at that level for that group of, right? Like there's
it's the only one I think in the world.
To me, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Like the yes, but why? But anyway, I don't, not to derail your thought or your speaking, but I just find it really interesting that we only have one.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the happy surprises of moving here, where I was like, oh, it was kind of, and just even kind of, as people, communicate now, how we communicate, and as a visual communicator and someone that wants to make sure that this content is like accessible to everyone, um, is there's so many different ways of communicating, but as a human being, there's that's one of the other things is, deaf people are coming from all backgrounds, is like, and they're connected, like, and something so new for me to be part of, um, and just, again, just like transness, making sure that I educate myself on the right words to be able to include whoever it is into the conversation. Like, that's something that I genuinely believe in. That is who I am. Like, I find that important, because everything we've been talking about is like the disconnect, the projection, the false narratives, and how easy that is communicated, and just the fact that we know so many people just gravitate to that is interesting, is fascinating. I'm not going to say it's good or bad, but I'm going to say it's fascinating that it's a phenomenon that is happening right in front of our eyes. Um, and so, like, literally, when you're, that the method of embalming and using the right fluids to make sure that the pigment of someone comes back to more of a natural state. Like, you have to know color. You have to know how you can bring back someone's skin tone that's dead to make them look as realistic as possible, as opposed to like not knowing what you're doing, and then you go to an open casket funeral and someone looks completely like not who they were. And for me, I consistently got feedback on my ability to embalm and really do someone's like makeup to make them look at peace. Like, there was just something that I found very fascinating about that. And I don't talk about it a lot because it's for other reasons, but I really miss that part of that work because it's an event that can't be redone. It's a life event, and having my biological father die when I was 4, like that's I live with that every day. I live with death every day, um, and that's why I feel so pulled towards living my life as authentically as possible because there were so many people that would get up and say kind of terrible things about people, and they waited to that moment to say those terrible things. Or some family had a lot of money and the siblings are fighting over it, like the family's disconnected, but the family was rich as fuck and had donated all this type of money, and their whole family structure was broken, but the money was the the thing that they all, but if someone was in charge of it or someone was making decisions about it, everyone had an opinion.
And death brought those conversations.
Mm-hmm. And so I would be in a room, in my office, have like arranging a funeral with grown ass men bawling probably for the first time in their lives or the first time in like years that their mom died. Or usually it was, those would be like the ones that were closest with their moms that hadn't really expressed any emotion, and I was able to kind of like be there, to get the vital statistics to be able to submit a death certificate to the state, and then to get a burial or cremation permit. So my ability to connect with people comes from a very real place. And that was one of the interview questions I had recently. I was like, they asked what would I bring. I was like, I think my humanness, my approach to how I can connect people to technology in a very realistic way. I don't know if that was the right answer or not, but that's what I think one of my gifts is I'm able to just like empathize.
And perhaps because it wasn't a rehearsed cookie cutter answer, it comes from the truth, it stands out more. And I mean, as I hear you speaking, there's two things that come up for me. One, I think I'm just realizing I've heard you talk about death many times and your relationship to it, and how you've been able to pull from those experiences to see the more colorful side of life, but like almost the reason why we have life, right? Like we talk about the celebration of who that person was, but having that notion of like, not that death can come at any moment, but death is inevitable for all of us. And there's again, how are we going to spend that time from when we took breath to taking our last breath? Mm. And you do have a very front row seat that a lot of us haven't had, and you've had a very intimate relationship to death. You've seen it through the lens of multiple practices, multiple ways of life, multiple cultures. And I mean, I think I'm just realizing, like, I myself never realized, I don't want to say never realized, I'm looking at how my family comes together at this point, not because we're celebrating life, like no one in my family seems to be having any babies. We're always celebrating death. And in the last, I'd say 5 years for me, that's become the time and place where my family comes and I think has like a reckoning with mortality. Mm-hmm. And I've always heard you speak about it, and I think for me, there's just never been this apprehension for death. There was definitely a point where I realized, like, I'm wasting my life living in my fake reality, and looking at the time I have now as somewhat of a sense of urgency. There's definitely a sense of urgency there, like I don't want to push it off. There's also the sense of watching what's been happening in the world and looking at, like, okay, it's never too late to be a voice of experience, or to be a role model, or not be a role model, or just be visible. I guess the words that come to mind right now, they feel a little bit like token words, but at the same time, the more avenues people have to hear it, then they need to hear it wherever it's coming from, however they're digesting that information. But I think it does come back to, you do make people think differently. And I also look at your ability to, when you were talking about the makeup part, and not to bring it back to drag, but to bring it back to drag, like there's that correlation again of, there's this skill at thinking different being cultivated back then, not knowing how it was going to show up now, right? Like I'm pretty sure drag was not on your mind back then, or it could have been, who knows. But not knowing that skill in bringing, I don't want to say bringing back the dead, but in that skill of bringing the humanity back into someone's appearance when their soul and their consciousness has left them. And now, fast forwarding however many years it was since then, your 20s to your 30s, a decade, and looking at how it's a different artistry. You're still painting, you're still bringing a different sense of life to this space. Obviously, it's a different medium and there's a different construct, right? Like you're dealing with no soul, no consciousness. There is a soul and a consciousness, but you're evoking a different introspection. That's a brand new word. But bringing back that introspective thought and how you're like pulling that out of individuals, out of your skill and out of your work, of transforming what we immediately see and interact with, and then taking it to the next, taking it beyond that. Right? So I see these two correlations in what you used to do, how it's showing up now, whether they're related or not.
No, it's all connected. Right? All the dots connect.
All the dots are connecting, but just like how it's transformed and how the conversation may have transformed, but the underlying river underneath that is still this education force of looking beyond the immediate facade. You know, you painted that person in their death, but in painting that person, you're looking beyond the death of that person. You're looking at the life of the years that person spent with whoever else was in the room to come and celebrate them. And now, you know, look, I'm just going to continue to use drag as that medium just because I've now seen a couple shows in the last couple weeks and months. And because we've been talking about it, it's just seeing how when we look at drag shows, whether you're a part of the community, not part of the community, whether you're just there, it's your first time, like between, I look at it as this way of like, not an alternate reality, but it's just this whole different way of seeing people. It's a whole different way of seeing people, and you're seeing their candle, and you're seeing what, you know, how these people move through the world. And that's what I look at. And you keep talking, and you've talked a lot about like your calling feels more around education and not showing people the new medium, but showing people how to transition into what is coming, like what is there to come. Like even you saying like 2020 is coming, 2020 is coming. That was still in preparation to show us and teach us, like, get your mind open. Like, open your mind to something else other than what not shoving down our throats, but like what there is constantly bombarding our neural stimuli, like beyond the marketing and beyond the interruptions of commercials, and when the commercials are louder than the TV show, or you go on Facebook and you go click an article and all you're doing is busy clicking all the X's so that you can just get to the article. The fact that we have like reader view, like all this stuff we gotta parse through, and you naturally are a light for people to gravitate towards to fight through all of that mess. That's what I'm here. Like that's
Mm.
from my perspective, from where I sit, and having known you for the 10 or 11 years, and having heard your stories over the last couple of years, and especially more so now that you've been sharing a lot more of the deeper side of your upbringing and your family, like watching or being able to connect the dots myself, right? Like after I drew out your family tree,
Literally.
yeah, like being able to finally connect some of those dots and hearing this. This is the first time you and I have really gone back and forth and wrapped. We've done this before, but really wrapping back and forth and talking about with a little bit of intention and purpose what we're here to say and speak and put out there. I do feel like a lot of these dots are coming together now, being able to have a different, deeper dive and look with intention that I'm looking deeper on a deeper level, being able to see that and being able to connect that to your purpose. One, being someone in a position where I'm here to support that journey as a friend, as a confidant, as someone who's been your daddy for however long, right? We play about that, but like that's our relationship. Like we've gotten that close because we've shared our thoughts, our beliefs, our boundaries, or what we want to put out there's our what we think might be our calling. I don't know mine yet, but like watching you really hone in on that specific aspect, like honing in on the fact that you make people think differently, honing in on the fact that that you've been training and teaching for the last 10, 11 years, maybe longer than that, but how that has somehow like surrounded your aura is like you've become this guide in life. And like just watching it unravel, or not unravel is not the right word, watching it unveil itself, not unravel, unveil itself. And it's just watching you navigate it or step wherever you're stepping and how you're creating the future of that journey. It's important, right? It's just, it makes me appreciate what this conversation is even more. And the potential if someone was to hear it and listen to it, what would they pull from it? Because their own life experience is going to hear something different. I have a very insider view, but for someone who may not have that insider view into our intimate relationship with one another and having grown together over the last 11 years, but it would be really interesting to see like what does get pulled from this conversation. That's what I pulled. But
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know how to process all of that, but I hear it, and I believe it. I've needed this much time to just like you said, unravel like the shit, And even like my painted nails, as you were talking about it, I was like, it was because I was painting old ass dead bitches' nails that I learned how to do this so good. They're like, I want my mama's nails to look good. um, yeah, more Palo Santo on that note.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think it's, thank you for everything as always.
thank you.
Yeah,
It goes both ways.
yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive, and it's interesting to kind of like want to reflect back on those experiences because outside of the relationship that was intertwined within the job, I really, really, enjoyed it. I really took a lot from it. And while I was going through college, I was taking a cultural anthropology class, and as I got further into like what cultural anthropology is, and the differences between social and cultural, I really like started intentionally looking at funerals like as an anthropological study on death. Um, and what I took away from it was music, was sound, and how sound is healing. And so I think I want to continue to like go down that path. It's just one of those areas of my creativity where I'm still most like vulnerable about and still most like self-conscious about. But I think you put into words a little bit more of like what is my intention in wanting to do drag. I like it. It's just fun. It's, I could be, I did my first kind of stepping out of the house in drag, for Halloween, which, was just it was such a freeing moment. And I feel like that unlocked a lot of just potential, and to just like kind of navigate that space, Um, so, I really want to pursue it more. I just gotta create space for it. And that's, I guess, the intention going into 2022. Like, I know I'm a natural teacher. I'm a constant learner. I want to learn as much as I can about different things. But I think what you've helped me realize tonight is like, yeah, I am a natural teacher. And it comes off easy just because I listen to people. I want to share. And I know I have, for whatever reason, I have the words to share it in ways that I think that I know people, listen to and like get. And that's something that just comes kind of naturally.
I think also with your talks about sound, and we look at how the different cultures come together because we don't always all speak the same language,
Mm-hmm.
but vibrations speak to us,
Mm-hmm.
patterns speak to us, and I think that's the first place where we come together is listening to different people's sound and music. Right? We don't know what they're saying, but when we're dancing
Mm-hmm.
or when we're moving to a beat or to a groove, we evoke those feelings and those emotions, and we start talking to each other without talking to each other.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's what I love about music festivals is like you could be hundreds, if not thousands, of people in one space, and a beat drops, and the crowd is just moving at the same. They're it's just that. That for me, that's what I get so lost in those, like when I'm dancing, because I just feel like my freest like in those moments. And I feel like that's something, even though deaf people can't hear, they can feel a strong bass. They can feel. I remember this photo that I have to pull up. I have to find it, but I remember this guy like meditating in front of these speakers, and these are like huge, like floor to ceiling, like stacked speakers. And this dude is just like meditating. I'm like, I like being close to the speakers, but like, how is he even doing that? And I look back on it and I was like, what if he was deaf? Maybe that was his, like, he can feel that pulsating, like, energy through that sound. I don't know for sure that was the case, but I'm going to use that as a reference point.
Yeah, that's not a wild thing to infer. Completely in the world of possibility.
Yeah. We'll see what that manifests into in the next year or so. But I'm definitely ready to like elevate to it.
I found this very interesting. I don't know if you can see this, but do you see what it says on that wine bottle?
Growers Series, 2007.
Buzz.
Buzz. Did, did I tell you?
Buzz Light.
Yeah, Buzz Lightyear. Yes.
I just found that very interesting as
Yes.
I'm like looking at the wine bottle. I'm like, oh, there's Buzz.
Buzz to infinity and beyond.
And beyond.